So recently, two new, very different spin-off TV series premiered. I'm talking about Marvel's Wonder Man and the Game of Thrones prequel, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. And both of these shows are actually really good. Now, while one series is a comedy about a struggling actor trying to make it in Los Angeles while hiding his superpowers, and the other is a drama about a hedge knight in dirty old Westeros, these series actually have a few things in common that I think are the key to why both of these spin-off series actually have made it and are as good as they are. And that's exactly what I wanted to talk about in this video. These are my top 3 lessons about spin-offs from Wonder Man and A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Number 1, start small, you can always go bigger. Now, of course, both Game of Thrones and the MCU are massive franchises that have done spin-offs before, especially the MCU, which is basically just one big jumble of different spin-offs and sequels. However, one thing that really makes A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms and Wonder Man stand out is that they're not trying to be on the same level as the original series that these are spun off from. The previous spin-off of Game of Thrones was House of the Dragon, which felt very much in line with the original series of Game of Thrones in scope and scale. It felt very much just like a continuation of Game of Thrones, except now you didn't know any of the characters. And with a lot of these Marvel spin-off series, you also have these huge extinction level events that are on par with the theatrical movies. Like, take the entirety of Secret Invasion, but also things like WandaVision or Falcon and Winter Soldier. These series try to set up something really big from the beginning without really having earned that huge epic scale. Like, especially with House of the Dragon, this is a huge show with a bunch of different characters, but it just feels kind of rushed because they want to get through these big epic battle moments. So they even have a time jump in the middle of the series to move it along faster. The original Game of Thrones didn't have those big epic battle moments at the very beginning. They slowly built up to it, letting us get to know the characters and care for them before they threw them into those situations. They just sort of teased us with these moments at the beginning, and then in the later seasons we really got these big epic things, and it felt deserved. However, with House of the Dragon, they wanted to start us out at that level. They wanted to start us out at that epic scale that we got from season 7 and 8 of Game of Thrones. But like I just said, we didn't know the characters yet, so it didn't feel as impactful. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, though, takes a completely different approach. This is a show that is basically just about one guy and his squire, and where House of the Dragon tells a story that spans like years in the first season alone. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms basically all takes place during the same week. Of course, it isn't just those two characters. We are introduced to a bunch of side characters as well. Daniel Ings as Sir Lionel Baratheon is a particular standout of the series. And the show is loosely sort of tied into the larger Game of Thrones story. There are mentions, as I said, of Baratheons and Targaryens and the Red Keep in King's Landing and that sort of stuff. But it's not really important to the story that we're seeing here. It doesn't feel like it's necessary to watch this show to understand Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, but it also doesn't feel like it's necessary to watch those shows in order to understand A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. And that, to me, is really good if you want to try and capture a new audience, because it's a hell of a commitment to have to watch all of Game of Thrones first. And I think a lot of the Marvel spin-offs have that problem as well. They want you to have watched all of the Captain America movies before going into Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because you're gonna need that backstory in order to understand this story. However, that is not the case with Wonder Man. That is a completely standalone story that takes the stakes all the way down to one guy and his personal struggles. That series does get tied into the larger MCU MCU with some connections to Iron Man 3 and Shang-Chi, with the appearance of Trevor Slattery or the fake Mandarin played by Ben Kingsley. But his whole backstory is not really important, and it's not made important in order to understand and enjoy Wonder Man. But then if people start to connect with Wonder Man and they enjoy these characters in this story, they can build upon that and make it bigger and tie more into the MCU. But it won't feel like they build up something way too big that they now can't ignore in the future. We've seen that with some of the Marvel movies where the Eternals, for instance, wasn't a huge success, but now they introduced this whole team of heroes and some intergalactic stuff, and there's suddenly a giant hand coming out of the earth, and they somehow have to tie that into the future of the MCU, but people don't necessarily really want to go back and watch Eternals because it just wasn't that interesting to people. We've seen this approach of starting very small work really well for Star Wars and The Mandalorian. That show started off by being completely separate and this tiny little niche thing, but as the show's popularity grew and people really started to connect with the characters, you saw them incorporate more of the wider Star Wars universe, and you saw Luke Skywalker show up and Ahsoka and all those other characters from other Star Wars movies. But they started out really small and then build upon that further on. So yeah, that's the first lesson. Start off small, you can always go bigger. Lesson number 2, tell the story you have the budget for. This, of course, very much ties into that first lesson as well, where with a lot of the MCU Disney Plus shows, you had them set up this huge epic confrontation, this big extinction level event, but you just did not have the budget to tell something of that scale in a 8 to 10 episode series. And that just means that when you have something that is set up to be this very epic thing like a Marvel movie, and you don't have the budget to actually take that all the way to the finish line, you have a finale of a series that just falls kind of flat, and where the whole finale just ends up being Captain America saying to some guys that they have to do better. And that could have been a satisfying conclusion to a series, but that's just not what they set us up to expect from these Marvel series. With Wonder Man, though, they set up a story where you have barely any superpowers for most of the show. So when those superpowers finally emerge near the end of the season, that is enough of an escalation to feel satisfying. And the real conclusion to the story can just be about two people's relationship and whether or not they stay friends. Now, when they made House of the Dragon, they obviously had the budget to do something of the scale that House of the Dragon was, but I think that might have been to their detriment. They had dragon money, so they had to do dragons, which meant that the story had to be rushed in order to get to the dragons. But that's sort of beside the point. With A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, they obviously had a much smaller budget, but they make way better use of that budget. That budget goes so much further when all you really need for the setting is a field and a bunch of mud. You don't have to build these big elaborate sets. You don't have to make CGI dragons. You just have to make these very intimate knight duels work. And they really do. I'm not one to sit here and say no to dragon battles. Of course I'm not. But I challenge you to find anyone who thinks that the battles in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms are less impactful than the dragon fights in House of the Dragon. But this leads me to lesson number 3. Change the formula, not the franchise. It's always nice to get something completely original, something truly new. But a lot of us also find a lot of comfort in our favorite franchises. Whenever you start a new franchise, you have to go through all of this world building that can get a little bit tiring if you have to go through that over and over again. So it's nice to just go back to a world where you know how things work. That's why we keep going back to things like Star Wars and Pokemon and Game of Thrones and Marvel. There's been a lot of talk about superhero fatigue, and I don't really buy that. I don't think people are tired of superheroes per se. I just think that people got tired of all of the Marvel movies seeming like the same movie over and over again, just with a different hero. Most of them have been structured in a very similar way, and a lot of the Marvel series have felt very similar as well. So that's why I think it's really great when they start telling a different kind of story. When you take it all the way down to just kind of a regular guy in this whole insane Marvel universe, just trying to live his life. That suddenly becomes really interesting. That's a different way of looking at the MCU. And the same thing with Game of Thrones. Like I said, House of the Dragon felt very much just like a continuation of Game of Thrones, except now we didn't know any of the characters. So while we were trying to figure out who was who and who was related and who was not, they were just throwing battles and dragons and castles and politics and everything at us. But A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms takes it all the way down and just focuses on one guy and his experience and what it's like to just be a regular person in Westeros. And while his story isn't about becoming the king of everything and defeating the forces of evil, it is very interesting because it's well told and it gives us a different perspective of this world. Now, I don't hope that any studios takes this as a free pass to just keep pumping out the same franchises again and again and again, but it's just to say that we do want more of these franchises if they just spice it up a little bit, give us something new, a different perspective, a different type of story. So there you have it, those were my 3 lessons from Wonder Man and A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Start small, you can always go bigger, tell the story you have the budget for, and change the formula, not the franchise. But what do you guys think about all of this? Do you agree with my takeaways? And what is your wildest idea for a spin-off of an existing franchise? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're down there, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and feel free to subscribe to the channel if you want more videos from me. But that's it. That's pretty much all I had for you today. My name is Martin Rice. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care and so long.